John Garand was a creative genius who overcame every obstacle in the design of his rifle. The conventional wisdom had it that the rifle couldn't be made, it couldn't be produced because it was too complicated.
What if I told you that one simple rifle didn't just give American soldiers an edge, it revolutionized warfare itself? That this weapon, faster and deadlier than anything your enemies had, turned ordinary men into unstoppable annihilation machines. This is the story of a weapon that changed firepower, battlefield tactics, and earned its place in history as the greatest battle implement ever devised. But why? Let's find out. When World War II kicked off, most armies were still stuck in the past, relying on slow, bolt-action rifles, the same kind that had dominated World War I. These rifles were solid and dependable, but they had one big drawback. They were slow. After every shot, the soldier had to manually work the bolt, pull it back, eject the empty shell, push it forward, and then aim again. In the middle of a firefight, that meant precious seconds lost and a higher risk of getting hit. Germany had the Carabiner 98K. Japan used the Arisaka, and Italy relied on the Carcano. All good rifles for their time, but in a fast-moving war, they just couldn't keep up. America, though, had something different. It wasn't just a tank or a plane, it was a rifle. The M1 Garand. In 1936, the US Army officially made it their standard weapon, and it was the first semi-automatic rifle to be widely adopted by any major military. Instead of working a bolt after each shot, soldiers with an M1 could just keep pulling the trigger. 8 powerful 30-06 rounds, one after another, without needing to pause or readjust. That speed, it gave American troops a serious edge. For enemy soldiers on the receiving end, the difference was devastating. And all of it came from the mind of John Garand, a brilliant self-taught engineer from Quebec. By the 1920s, Garand was working at the Springfield Armory, where he began designing a rifle that could load and fire itself. His first few attempts used a complex blowback system, but it didn't hold up well in combat tests. So he went back to the drawing board and came up with something better. A gas-operated system that harnessed the energy from each shot to load the next one. That one change, it would end up changing the future of infantry combat. Back in 1930, John Garand filed a patent for a new kind of rifle, one that didn't rely on bolts or levers, but instead used the force of each fired shot to reload itself. It was gas-operated and clip-fed, meaning it used the hot gases from a fired round to push a piston and cycle to the next one into place. At first, Garand designed the rifle to fire a .276 caliber round, but that didn't last long. General Douglas MacArthur stepped in and said no, America had massive stockpiles of .30-06 ammunition already, and switching calibers just wasn't practical. Luckily, Garand had seen this coming. He'd already built a version of the rifle chambered in .30-06. That move sealed the deal. On January 9, 1936, the US military officially adopted his design as the rifle caliber .30 M1. But the first Garands off the production line weren't perfect. They used something called a gas trap system. The idea was to catch the gas from the fired round at the very end of the barrel and use it to work the rifle's action. On paper, it sounded great. In practice, not so much. The system was overcomplicated and unreliable, especially in harsh conditions. Word of the rifle's problem even made it to Congress. Garand knew it had to be fixed and fast, so in 1939, he redesigned the rifle. This time, instead of trapping gas at the muzzle, he drilled a small port near the front of the barrel. The gas now flared into a cylinder under the barrel, pushing a piston that cycled the bolt. It was simpler, tougher, and a whole lot more reliable. That version of the rifle became the standard. That was the M1 Garand that would go to war. As tensions rose around the world, so did the urgency to produce this new weapon. The Springfield Armory and Winchester both fired up their factories, and by the first time the US entered the war, M1 Garands were coming off the line in the thousands. By the end of World War II, over 4 million had been made. These rifles were no lightweight toys. Built from tough American steel and solid walnut, each one stretched over 3.5 feet long, with a 24-inch barrel and weighing up to 11.5 pounds depending on the model. They fired the .30-06 Springfield round, a powerful cartridge known for its punch and long-range performance, and they were fed with an 8-round end-block clip. Once you fired your last round, the empty clip would pop out of the rifle with a loud, unmistakable ping. That ping, it became legendary. American soldiers knew it well, but so did their enemies. There were plenty of stories going around that enemy troops had learned to listen for that sound. It meant the rifle was empty, and that split second could be the perfect time to charge. Maybe it was true, maybe not, but American troops didn't take any chances. Some got clever, tossing empty clips onto hard surfaces to trick enemy soldiers into showing themselves. It wasn't just about shooting, it became a psychological game. The M1 Garand didn't just change the way soldiers fought, it changed the way they thought in battle. The M1 Garand just didn't show up to war. It showed up and outperformed just about everything else on the battlefield. It turned regular infantrymen into fast, fierce shooters. A soldier trained on the M1 could let off 40 to 50 accurate shots in a single minute. That kind of firepower was unheard of with bolt-action rifles. And we're not just talking about stats here. We're talking about real people in real fights. Like Private John R. McKinney. On May 11, 1945, in Luzon, Philippines, his unit got hit with a surprise attack. It was brutal. But McKinney didn't run. Armed with just his Garand, he stood his ground and took out 38 enemy soldiers and kept the position from falling. For that, he was awarded with the Medal of Honor. But it wasn't just about medals. That rifle, his M1, was what stood between life and death. Wherever the US fought during World War II, the M1 Garand was there. In the Pacific, it tore through thick jungle, clear and fast. In Europe, it held strong in frozen foxholes, muddy trenches, and shattered cities. The rifle's design, tough, dependable, and quick, gave American troops a serious edge. Axis soldiers were still clicking through bolt-action cycles while Americans were already on their 5th or 6th shot. The Garand didn't just match the conditions, it mastered them. Other countries took notice too. The British tried it out back in 1939 but chose to keep producing their Lee Enfields. It made sense. They needed to rely on existing factories. But once the war ended, things changed. Countries like France, Italy, Greece, and more started getting M1s through US military aid. During the war itself, though, the Garand was uniquely American. No other nation was issuing semi-automatic rifles on such a wide scale. That alone gave the US a clear advantage in firepower, speed, and morale. And even when World War II ended, the M1 Garand's service didn't. It came back for more during the Korean War. This time, Springfield and Winchester weren't the only ones building it. 2 new names joined the production line: International Harvester and Harrington and Richardson. The newer rifles included minor upgrades, better rear sights, sturdier operating rods, simpler trigger guards. These changes didn't make the rifle feel different to a soldier, but they made it tougher and cheaper to build. The Garand wasn't being replaced, it was being perfected. And then came a new role for the M1: precision shooting. The military developed sniper versions, the M1C and M1D. These rifles had scopes and sometimes flash suppressors, letting soldiers reach out and hit targets at serious distance. The M1C got official approval in 1944, though it didn't see much action during the war. But by the time US forces were dug into Korea's hills, the M1C and M1D were in full use. Even in Vietnam, legendary Marine sniper Carlos Hathcock used a scoped Garand for some of his missions. It had gone from infantry workhorse to long-range killer. But war always demands more. In thick jungles and tight drop zones, the full-length Garand could feel like a lot to carry. So the military started experimenting. They tried cutting the barrel down to 18 inches, creating a version called the T-26. It was meant for paratroopers and jungle fighters. Same guts, just more compact. But there was a trade-off. Firing it was loud, rough, and not nearly as accurate. Another version, M1E5, had a folding stock to make it easier to carry. On paper, it was smart. In action, not so much. The metal stock was uncomfortable and the rifle's performance dropped. Neither model went mainstream, but they showed just how much the military was trying to squeeze even more out of the Garand. By the time the 1950s rolled into the 60s, the US military had moved on to newer rifles like the M14 and eventually the M16. But the Garand didn't vanish, it stuck around. Countries that had received Garands under military aid programs continued using them for decades. Many rifles were rebuilt again and again, swapping barrels, replacing stocks, upgrading sights. The result was a generation of M1s that were a little bit of everything. Part World War II, part Korea, part modern fix-up. To collectors today, these Mixmaster rifles are more than spare parts. They're living history. A new barrel might tell you that the rifle was reissued during Korea. A different stock could mean it got passed to an ally or rebuilt at an armory. Every piece swapped out is a clue to where it's been and who might have carried it. These aren't museum pieces behind glass. They're veterans of multiple wars, still telling their stories in wood and steel. In countries across the world, the M1 Garand found a new life. Italy took the classic design and made it their own, creating the BM-59 by upgrading the original Garand to use detachable magazines and the newer NATO 7.62 by 51 mm round. This gave the rifle a modern edge while keeping its legendary reliability. Other nations followed suit. Greece, Turkey, Denmark, Japan, and South Korea all put the M1 to work, some of them holding onto these rifles long after the world's superpowers had moved on. In fact, it's not unusual to see Garands still in actions decades later, even in conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, where they've shown up in the hands of fighters, still working, still effective. But in the United States, the story of the Garand didn't end when the last shots of World War II faded. Thanks to the civilian marksmanship program, thousands of surplus M1s went from military armories to the hands of everyday Americans. Owning a Garand became more than just having a piece of hardware. It was about holding a part of history. These rifles are now regulars at shooting ranges, a highlight in collections, and they're still a central part of official ceremonies. The U.S. Marine Corps Silent Drill Team continues to use the M1 for their flawless performances. So does the Norwegian King's Guard, as well as military academies and honor guards in countries like Greece, Belgium, Japan, and the Philippines. Wherever there's a parade or a moment of remembrance, you might still see the iconic shape of the Garand being carried with pride. What's really special about the M1 Garand isn't just the clever mechanics or its tough build, it's what it represents. This was a rifle dreamed up by an immigrant engineer, put through the toughest battles of the 20th century, and carried by regular people who found themselves doing remarkable things. The Garand made soldiers faster and more effective. It pushed military technology forward and evened the odds on some of the world's toughest battlefields. And for everyone who used it, this rifle became something personal, a trusted tool, a lifeline, sometimes even a ticket home. In a war that changed the world, the M1 Garand changed what a rifle could be. It was quick, strong, and unbreakably reliable. It didn't just meet the moment, it helped shape the outcome. That's why all these years later, the Garand isn't just remembered as a weapon, it's remembered as the rifle that helped win the war, and that's a legacy few other guns can claim. So in the end, the M1 Garand was more than just a rifle. It was a symbol of a new kind of soldier, faster, stronger, and ready for anything. If you're interested in more fascinating history content, make sure to click on the next video.